When you first look at a chart, it can seem like a tremendous amount of information to digest all at once. From determining the type, inner authority, and profile, to getting a grasp on the centers, channels, and gates, there's so much to explore and make sense of. This is where the art of keynoting, also called synthesis, comes in. It allows you to link together the various elements of a chart and begin to tell the story of the unique, energetic configuration in front of you. Ra used to point to the example of the classic children's activity, connect the dots. You'd see a page full of numbered dots that needed to be joined with a single, continuous line before the image could come alive. What started as a jumble of seemingly random points would gradually reveal itself to be a lion, an elephant, an airplane, etc. Before those dots are connected, the image is unclear, and the story or meaning behind it is nearly impossible to describe accurately. A unique body graph is no different. With keynoting, you're connecting the dots between the various elements of a chart to build out a story of what's there, making the interpretation and the interconnected relationships within the chart come alive through words. Let's walk through the elements of Stephen King's chart together and build out what is essentially a reading of his design. All we're doing is connecting the dots between the various pieces and revealing what's already there. Here's how we'll approach it. We'll start by identifying his type, strategy, inner authority, and profile. From there, we'll weave in his channel definition and a synthesis of his openness, where he is most susceptible to conditioning. At the end, we'll tie in his Incarnation Cross and summarize the chart as a whole. Each component is a dot in the sequence, and as we connect them, the chart comes alive, and we can begin to appreciate the energetic story of the design. Stephen King is a manifesting generator. That is the first thing to understand about the man, and it explains more about his output than any biography can. A manifesting generator carries the same defined sacral center as every generator, that deep, fertile, almost inexhaustible motor that generates creative life force, but with an added speed from its connection to the throat that brings a capacity to move fast, multitask, and get things into the world with startling efficiency. The sacral is the body's primary engine for sustained life force, and King has had consistent access to it his entire life. This is a man designed to be busy, not busy in the hollow, distracted sense, but busy in the way that a river is busy, always moving, always generating, always spending the day's energy fully and regenerating overnight to do it again. The aura of a generator type is open and enveloping. It takes everything in. King has talked about this in his own way for years, the way he absorbs the world around him, the way ordinary details of American life, roadside diners, small-town politics, the sound a screen door makes, pour into him and come back out as fiction. That absorptive quality is the generator aura doing what it does. It pulls in the full texture of life. And because a manifesting generator is so open to conditioning, to being shaped by everything it takes in, King's writing has always had that quality of feeling deeply, almost uncomfortably real. Even when the subject matter is supernatural or extreme, he is not inventing from thin air, he is responding to what he has absorbed. The generator's strategy is to respond, not to initiate from the mind, not to decide what to write next based on what the market wants, but to wait for something to show up, an image, a phrase, a situation, and feel the body say yes or no. When the sacral says yes, the energy commits, sometimes for a scene, sometimes for a 1,000-page novel. The signature of this type, when it's working correctly, is satisfaction. The not-self theme, the signal that something has gone wrong, is frustration. Anyone who has read King's memoir On Writing can see this mechanic in action. He has described again and again how his best work comes not from planning, but from responding to whatever image or situation grabs him, then following it with that relentless daily output. The manifesting generator's particular trap is busyness for its own sake, or initiating from the mind rather than responding from the gut. King's well-documented struggles with addiction in the 1980s could be read, at least in part, through this lens. The motor running at full speed on fuel the body never actually said yes to. His sacral authority means the body itself is the decision maker, not the rational mind. The body knows before the head catches up. King has been remarkably consistent in describing his creative process as something that happens below conscious thought, characters doing things he didn't plan, stories going directions he didn't map out. He has said many times that he doesn't outline. He follows the energy. That is a sacral authority at work. Whether he would use that language or not, the body leads, the mind watches. The risk always is committing energy to things the body didn't actually agree to, which leads to frustration and exhaustion rather than satisfaction. King carries a 6-2 profile, the Role Model Hermit. This is one of the most distinctive profiles in human design because it moves through 3 clearly defined life phases, and with King, all 3 are visible in the public record. The first phase, roughly the first 30 years, is trial and error at its most raw. Pure experimentation, getting burned, making mistakes, trying things that don't work, being pulled from one experience to the next. King's early life fits this precisely. The difficult childhood, the poverty, the early attempts at writing that went nowhere or went to small magazines for tiny checks, the drinking that started young, the teaching jobs he didn't want, the rejection slips he famously pinned to a nail on the wall. This is the first phase 6th line, living through everything the hard way, gathering experience that will matter later but doesn't feel like wisdom at the time. It feels like chaos. It feels like things keep not working. Around 30, the 6th line moves onto the roof, a period of withdrawal and observation that lasts roughly until 50. This doesn't mean disappearing from life entirely. It means developing a more detached, objective perspective. For King, this period roughly coincides with the years of enormous commercial success from the late 1970s through the 1990s. He was productive, yes, but he was also increasingly removed from ordinary life by fame, by money, and frankly, by addiction. The roof can be a literal withdrawal from the mess of the world, or it can be a psychological distance. King was watching American life from a very particular vantage point during those years, close enough to absorb it, far enough away to see patterns. His fiction during that period is full of that observer quality, that ability to look at how people actually behave and report it with unsettling accuracy. It was also in this phase, in the late 1980s, that he got sober, after an intervention led by his wife Tabitha. That clarity, gathered mid-phase, shaped everything that followed. The second line, the hermit, reinforces this withdrawal. The second line is the natural. It has an inherent talent that operates best when left alone, and it needs solitude to function. King's daily writing routine, hours alone in a room, door closed, the world kept out, is the hermit line in its element. He has described this need for solitude in practical, unglamorous terms. It is not romantic isolation. It is a body that does its best work when no one is watching. The second line also carries a quality that others notice and want to call out. People see the talent before the person themselves fully recognizes it. Tabitha King pulling the early pages of Carrie out of the trash is a perfect example. She saw what he could not yet see in himself. The third phase from 50 onward is the return from the roof, the role model phase. The sixth line comes back down into life and begins to embody what it learned during the first two phases. For King, this has been the period since roughly the late 1990s and especially the 2000s onward. The near-fatal accident in 1999 is an almost too neat marker for this transition. He had already been sober for about a decade by then, but the accident and its long, painful recovery reshaped his relationship to his own work and to his public role. He wrote on writing, published in 2000, which is as close to a role model's handbook as any author has produced. Here is what I learned, here is what works, here is what nearly destroyed me. He became more openly engaged with political life, with mentoring younger writers, with speaking plainly about craft and about the costs of doing it wrong. That is the sixth line doing what it was always designed to do. Not teaching from theory, but from lived experience. Not offering rules, but offering the hard-won knowledge of someone who went through all of it and came out the other side with something useful to say. At 78, King is deep in this role model phase. The 6-2 at this stage is not trying to prove anything. The experimentation is done. The retreat is done. What remains is the embodiment, being the example, not explaining the example. People seek him out not because he markets himself as a guru of writing, but because his life and his body of work demonstrate something real about what it means to commit fully to creative labor over a lifetime. The sacral motor is still running. The hermit still needs the closed door and the daily pages. But the quality of the engagement is different now. It is the engagement of someone who has nothing left to figure out about who he is, and everything to offer simply by continuing to be that person in plain view. In short, King is a manifesting generator with sacral authority and a 6-2 profile who has moved fully into his role model phase, a life force being whose enormous creative output is rooted in responding to what grabs him, working alone with natural talent, and now standing as an example of how a self-directed creative life actually works. King has single definition. This means every defined center in his chart is connected in one continuous flow. There are no gaps that need bridging by other people or by transit. He processes experience as a unified system. Information goes in and gets assimilated without waiting for an external piece to complete the circuit. This is a person who does not need someone else in the room to feel whole or to make sense of what he's working on. For a writer who has spent decades working alone in a room every morning, single definition is almost comically fitting. He is self-contained. The energy moves through him in one stream, and what comes out the other end, the books, the stories, the columns, carries that quality of internal consistency. There's no split to resolve, no dependency on a collaborator to feel complete. Now look at the channels, because this is where King's design gets remarkable. He carries an extraordinary concentration of integration channels, the group of 4 channels that form the backbone of individuation, of becoming and living as oneself. Most people have one of these, maybe 2. King has all 4, the channel of charisma, the channel of power, the channel of awakening, and the channel of perfected form. On top of this, he has the channel of exploration from the centering circuit and the channel of the brainwave from the knowing circuit. The result is a dense interlocking network between the throat, sacral, G-center, and spleen, all part of one continuous definition. The channel of charisma. The channel of charisma connects King's sacral motor directly to the throat. This is the manifesting power in manifesting generator made literal, awareness becoming deed, life force becoming expression. The keynote is a design where awareness must become deed, and in King's case, the deed is writing. This channel gives an urge to be continually busy and the energy to sustain that busyness over long periods. King has said he writes 2,000 words a day, every day, including holidays. That is the 2034 at work. When this channel operates correctly, when the busyness is rooted in response rather than compulsion, the activity itself becomes charismatic. People watch King work, read about his process, and feel inspired not by what he says about writing, but by the sheer fact of his sustained output. That is true charisma in the human design sense, not charm or personality, but the magnetic quality of someone whose life force is visibly and correctly engaged. When it is not functioning correctly, when busyness replaces purpose, you get the books. Even King admits he doesn't remember writing. The output that kept the machine running without the machine being pointed at anything the body actually chose. The channel of power. Paired with the channel of charisma is the channel of power running from the sacral to the spleen, raw life force meeting moment-to-moment intuitive awareness. This is the archetype of survival through instinct. People with this channel have a potentially perfected capacity for staying alive and staying well, as long as they trust their spontaneous responses rather than what they think is good for them. The 3457 is not intellectual, it is animal. It operates below thought, reacting to what is happening right now with speed and clarity. King's repeated descriptions of writing as something the body does, not the mind, characters surprising him, plots developing without outlines, the sense that the story knows where it's going, even when he doesn't, that is the 3457 in action. The splenic intuition moves faster than conscious thought. It assesses, it adjusts, it keeps the organism alive and moving. His best horror isn't intellectual. It's visceral. It comes from a body-level knowing about danger that the spleen provides and the sacral empowers. The years of addiction represent what happens when this channel is overridden by something else. When a substance dulls the splenic awareness and the sacral motor keeps running without its survival guide. When he got sober in the late 1980s, when he started listening to what was actually good for him rather than what he thought was good for him, the 3457 could begin to function the way it was designed to. The near-fatal accident a decade later in 1999 reads from this same angle like the splenic system demanding his full attention once more, a brutal reminder from the body he had spent years relearning how to trust. The channel of exploration. The channel of exploration connects the G center to the sacral, identity to life force, self to power. Its keynote is following one's convictions. This is the channel of finding what you truly love to do, and then doing it with such authenticity that others are empowered by the example. King followed his convictions in the face of decades of literary snobbery. He chose horror and suspense when the literary establishment treated those genres as disposable. He kept writing about blue-collar Americans in small towns when the publishing world rewarded metropolitan sophistication. He refused to pretend he was something other than what he was. The G Center provides the identity and direction. This is who I am. This is what I stand for. And the sacral provides the raw creative power to back it up, day after day, year after year. The empowerment this channel carries is not something King does on purpose. He doesn't set out to inspire other writers or readers to trust their own instincts. He does it by being visibly, unmistakably himself in his work. Every aspiring writer who has read on writing and felt permission to just do the work, without pretension, has experienced King's 1034 in action. The channel also carries a warning. When the mind takes over and starts controlling behavior, instead of letting the sacral respond, the same conviction can look rigid and self-centered in a way that pushes people away. King has had moments of this too. Feuds, public statements that generated more heat than light. But over the long arc, the authenticity has won out. The channel of awakening connects the G center to the throat, self-awareness expressed through speech and behavior. This is about being awake as yourself, moment to moment, and demonstrating that wakefulness through how you talk, how you act, how you show up. King with this channel has a quality you can observe in interviews going back decades. He says what he thinks, as himself, without performing a version of himself for the camera. Whether he is talking about politics, about addiction, about the craft of writing, or about what he had for breakfast, the voice is the same voice. There is no code switching into a literary persona. This consistency of self-expression is the 2010 at work. The channel gives a person the ability to speak for themselves no matter what is happening around them. King has exercised this in situations that ranged from receiving the National Book Award, where his acceptance speech directly challenged literary snobbery, to tweeting blunt, political opinions that cost him readers. The 2010 doesn't care about strategy. It cares about expressing what is true for the self, clearly enough that others can recognize the authenticity. When that clarity is present, it influences people. When it isn't, the words are just noise. The channel of perfected form. The channel of perfected form links the G center to the spleen, identity guided by intuition, behavior shaped by instinct rather than by planning or emotion. This is the design of survival through intuitive perfection of one's form. It describes a deep inner creative process, not managed by the mind, not governed by emotion, but arising spontaneously from intuition that is about refining and perfecting the way one expresses one's uniqueness. People with this channel are often artists, architects, and designers. King is obviously an artist, but the 1057 points to something more specific than just being creative. It points to the ongoing refinement of how he does what he does. Over 60+ years of writing, King has steadily perfected his particular form, not toward some external standard of literary excellence, but toward a more and more precise expression of his own way of seeing and rendering the world. The prose in his later work is leaner, more controlled, more exact than the early books. The characterization has deepened. The structural choices are bolder. This is not the result of taking workshops or following trends. It is the 1057 doing what it does. An instinct-driven process of perfecting the form, driven by the body's own sense of what is right, what is true, what is more fully itself. The channel also carries that quality of being self-absorbed in a way that is natural and necessary. King behind the closed door, immersed in the work, not available to the world while the work is happening, that is the 1057 self-centered creative process operating exactly as designed. He has been remarkably unbothered by critical opinion throughout his career, for better and worse. The channel of the brainwave. The channel of the brainwave connects the spleen to the throat, penetrating intuitive awareness expressed spontaneously. This gives King an extremely keen intuition that can penetrate to the core of a situation and act on what it finds instantly without needing to think it over. This is a deep-seated survival intelligence, and it is fast. It works in the moment and enables an intuitive assessment of any situation on the spot. In King's fiction, this shows up as the uncanny accuracy of his psychological portraits, the way he can nail a character's motivations or a social dynamic in a single sentence that feels like it cuts through everything extraneous and gets to the bone. He knows how a small town works. He knows what a 12-year-old boy is afraid of. He knows what a marriage sounds like when it's falling apart. This isn't research. It's intuitive recognition expressed immediately through the throat. The brainwave also carries a mutative quality, the ability to share existential knowing and accumulated wisdom in a way that changes the people who are receptive to it. This is what on-writing does. This is what the best of his fiction does, not instruct, not explain. Cut to the core and share what is found there. The channel operates through the knowing circuit, which means it is individual in nature. It doesn't share in the collective sense of distributing information widely. It shares by being so distinctly itself that the people who need what it carries are transformed by contact with it. The channel of inspiration. The channel of inspiration connects the G center to the throat through the knowing circuit. This is the channel of the creative role model. It describes a person who is here to express their individuality in a way that is so unmistakably unique that it sets an example for others. The channel represents the art of expression itself. King's particular version of this is not subtle. He has always stood out. The subject matter, the prolific output, the refusal to write according to anyone else's idea of what serious fiction should look like, even the physical presence, tall, a little rumpled, plain-spoken in a way that cuts against the polished author image. This channel requires that the expression come from a place of authenticity that is impervious to outside conditioning. And King's creative output has been remarkably resistant to the pressures that reshape most commercial writers over time. The literary establishment told him he wasn't serious. He kept writing what he wrote. Hollywood distorted his stories. He kept writing what he wrote. Critics dismissed horror as a genre. He kept writing what he wrote. That imperviousness is the 1-8 functioning. The channel also carries a condition. The creative contribution needs to be recognized and invited to have its full impact. King's early career shows this clearly. The talent was there, but until it was recognized by Tabitha, by the editor who bought Carrie, by the reading public that responded, the channel couldn't do its work. Once the recognition came, the impact was enormous, and the model he set of what a working writer could be has influenced generations of authors who came after him. The channel of the alpha. The channel of the alpha connects the throat to the G center. This is the channel of leadership, the design of someone who can point out a direction for the collective. This does not have to be formal leadership. It is about exercising influence within a community or a field. King has this, and you can see it operating in two distinct arenas. Within the world of popular fiction, he has been the dominant figure for half a century. His opinions about other writers, about the state of publishing, about what makes a story work, carry weight. When he endorses a younger writer, that writer's career changes. When he criticizes a trend in fiction, people pay attention. In the broader cultural and political sphere, King has increasingly used this channel's potential. His public statements on gun control, on political leadership, on social issues carry the force of someone whose influence was earned over decades, not assumed or imposed. The 31-7 requires being elected to a position of influence, not necessarily through a vote, but through the collective recognizing the person's capacity to represent their interests and point a direction. King was not appointed the spokesperson of American popular fiction or American cultural life. Readers and the broader public gave him that role by continuing to listen to what he had to say, by trusting his judgment, by looking to him when they wanted someone to articulate what they were feeling. That is the alpha channel being recognized, not imposed. The channel of the wavelength. The channel of the wavelength runs from the spleen to the throat through the logic circuit, intuitive depth meeting the expression of skill. This is the channel of talent and mastery, the one that says, find something you care about, practice it relentlessly, and over time achieve a level of skill that transcends the pattern you started with. This is not natural genius in the sense of something that arrives fully formed. It is a process. It demands consistent effort, repeated practice, and the willingness to stay with a skill through all the stages where it is not yet good enough. King's own account of his development as a writer matches this channel precisely. The early stories that didn't work, the years of writing in a laundry room, the slow accumulation of technique through the physical act of putting words on paper every single day. He has said explicitly that talent is cheaper than table salt, and that what separates the talented individual from the successful one is hard work. That is the 48-16 talking. The depth comes from the splenic side, a well of intuitive knowledge about what is healthy, what has depth, what connects to something real. The skill comes from the throat side, the ability to express, to articulate, to give form to what the intuition provides. Over time, the combination of depth and practice produces mastery that transcends its own patterns. King's best work does this. It follows the conventions of genre fiction and then, through the sheer accumulated mastery of the craft, exceeds them. The emotional precision of a book, like The Shining, the structural ambition of It, the stripped-down perfection of Misery, these are the products of a talent that was worked and reworked over years until it could do things that no amount of raw ability alone could accomplish. The channel of structuring. The channel of structuring connects the ajna to the throat, individual conceptual thinking expressed in words. This is a design of individuality from genius to freak. It describes a mind that thinks outside established frameworks and can conceptualize things in ways that are genuinely new. The thought process here can produce quantum leaps, insights that don't build incrementally on what came before, but jump to something entirely different. King's innovation as a writer was exactly this kind of leap. Before Carrie, horror fiction occupied a specific, relatively marginalized place in American publishing. What King did was not to improve horror fiction according to existing standards. He reconceptualized what it could be. He brought literary characterization, social realism, and the texture of ordinary American life into a genre that had mostly operated through atmosphere and shock. That is a 43-23 move. The idea didn't come from analyzing what was wrong with horror fiction and fixing it step by step. It came from seeing something nobody else was seeing and finding a way to express it. The channel also carries the genius to freak polarity. When the timing is right and the insight is communicated clearly, the impact can be enormous. When the timing is wrong or the communication is unclear, the result is alienation, being seen as strange, being misunderstood, being dismissed. King experienced both sides of this for decades. The literary establishment's long dismissal of his work as unserious was the freak side of the 4323. The massive popular recognition and the eventual institutional acknowledgement, the National Book Foundation's Medal for Distinguished Contribution to American Letters in 2003, the inclusion in serious critical discourse, was the genius side. The channel requires that the unique perspective be recognized by others in order to have its full effect. For years, it wasn't. Then it was. Both outcomes are built into the same wiring. What is striking about King's chart when you look at all of these channels together is the density of the integration channels. 4 of them, charisma, power, awakening, and perfected form the integration group, which is the underlying structure for individuation. These are the channels that support the process of becoming and living as oneself. They are not about connecting to others or serving the collective. They are about self-empowerment, self-preservation, and empowering the individual nature and direction of the self. King has all 4. That is a complete integration. The energy flows in a closed loop, sacral to spleen, to G-center, to throat and back. That sustains itself. This is part of why King has been able to maintain his identity and his creative direction so consistently over so many decades, despite massive fame, massive criticism, near-death experiences, and the kinds of pressures that reshape most public figures beyond recognition. The integration wiring holds. It keeps the self intact. Add the knowing circuit channels, the brainwave, inspiration, and structuring, and you get the mechanism for expressing that individuality outward. These are the channels through which King's unique way of seeing the world reaches other people, and, when the timing is right, changes how they see things too. The knowing circuit is about empowerment through uniqueness. It doesn't share in the way the collective circuits share. It mutates. It changes people not by giving them information, but by showing them something they hadn't seen before. Then layer in the 2 collective logic channels, the alpha and the wavelength, and you see where King connects to the broader human community. These channels give him the ability to identify patterns, develop mastery through practice, exercise leadership within his field, and share what he has learned in ways that serve collective needs. Without these channels, King might have been just as talented and just as individual, but he would not have had the mechanism for sustained, recognized influence on the wider culture. The logic channels ground his individuality in something the collective can use. The picture that emerges is of a design built for exactly the life King has lived. The self-contained creative engine, the intuitive survival intelligence, the relentless refinement of craft, the willingness to follow convictions regardless of external reception, and the capacity to express a unique vision so clearly that it becomes a reference point for others. Up to this point, we can see that Stephen King is a manifesting generator with sacral authority and a 6-2 profile, a self-contained creative engine built almost entirely for individuation, whose relentless, response-driven output, intuitive survival instinct, and refusal to write as anyone but himself have made him, in his role model years, the living example of what a working writer actually looks like. But all of that defined wiring, those channels, the sacral motor, the splenic awareness, the G-center identity, the throat's capacity for expression, only tells half the story. The other half is what King does not have defined. The open and completely open centers in his chart are where he has been conditioned by the world his entire life, and they reveal dimensions of his personality and his struggles that the defined channels alone cannot explain. His open solar plexus center. King has an open solar plexus center. This means he does not generate his own consistent emotional wave. He is not, by design, an emotional being in the way that roughly half of humanity is. What he is instead is a receiver and amplifier of other people's emotions. He walks into a room and picks up whatever emotional weather is happening there. He sits across from someone in conversation and absorbs what that person is feeling, often at a higher intensity than the person generating it. The open solar plexus takes in emotion and turns up the volume. This is one of the most powerful conditioning dynamics in the human experience, and in King's case, the evidence of it runs through almost everything he has done. Consider the fiction itself. King's ability to render emotional states, terror, grief, rage, the sick dread of knowing something terrible is about to happen, is often described as his greatest strength as a writer. That intensity does not come from King being a deeply emotional person in his own right. It comes from a lifetime of absorbing and amplifying the emotional states of everyone around him. He has been soaking up other people's feelings since childhood. His mother's anxiety, his students' frustrations, his readers' fears, his family's moods, and what comes out in the fiction is that accumulated, amplified material. He is, in effect, an emotional antenna with a massive amplifier attached, and his sacral motor and throat channels give him the means to pour all of that received emotional energy onto the page. The shadow side of the open solar plexus is equally visible. The not-self theme for this center is avoiding confrontation and truth. A person with an open solar plexus learns early that emotional environments can be overwhelming, and the instinct is to keep the peace, not rock the boat. Stay away from anything that might provoke an emotional eruption. King has talked about this dynamic in his own life. The years of not confronting his drinking, the way the people around him avoided confronting it too, the elaborate system of denial that kept everyone comfortable until it nearly killed him. That avoidance pattern is textbook open solar plexus conditioning. When King got sober and began speaking more directly about addiction, about politics, about what he actually thought of other writers or cultural trends, he was, in human design terms, moving toward the healthy expression of this open center. The healthy open solar plexus does not avoid confrontation, does not avoid truth. It absorbs the emotional environment without identifying with it, stays calm at the center of the storm, and says what needs to be said, regardless of the emotional reaction it might provoke. King, in his later decades, has become known for exactly this quality. He says things that make people uncomfortable. He picks public fights he could easily avoid. That willingness to confront is the open solar plexus operating correctly, not generating emotion, but refusing to be intimidated by other people's emotions. The other piece of this is that the open solar plexus, when it is functioning well, gives a person extraordinary emotional wisdom. Not emotional depth in the personal sense, but the ability to read the emotional states of others with precision, and to know which emotions belong to whom. King's characterization depends on this. His villains are terrifying in large part because he understands exactly how fear works in other people. Not because he walks around in a constant state of fear himself, but because he has been reading fear in others his entire life. His sympathetic characters feel real because he can pick up on the subtle emotional textures of ordinary people and render them accurately. This is the wisdom potential of the open solar plexus turned into art. His completely open root center Below the solar plexus, King carries a completely open root center. Not just undefined, completely open, no activations at all, no dormant gates to give even a loose framework for processing the energy that flows through it. The root is the adrenal system. It is pressure itself, the biological drive to act, to move, to get things done, to respond to deadlines and demands and survival imperatives. When this center is completely open, the person has no inherent relationship to pressure. They do not know what pressure is. They do not recognize it when it arrives. They cannot use it in a consistent or predictable way. This creates a specific pattern, oscillation between hyperactivity and total stillness, without understanding what triggers either state. The person with a completely open root is entirely at the mercy of the pressure environment. When they are around driven, stressed, deadline-focused people, they absorb and amplify that pressure and can become frantic, unable to stop moving, unable to rest. When the pressure lifts, when they are alone, or when the environment goes quiet, they can collapse into inactivity so complete that it looks like paralysis. King's writing life, looked at through this lens, makes a particular kind of sense. The periods of superhuman output, multiple books a year, screenplays, columns, short stories, all running simultaneously, were not just the sacral motor doing its thing. They were also the completely open root absorbing the pressure of the publishing industry, the expectations of editors and agents and fans, the sheer momentum of a commercial operation built around his name, and amplifying all of that into a pace that no person could sustain indefinitely. The flip side is there too. King has talked about the periods when he simply could not work, when the energy dried up and nothing came. Those are not writer's block in the romantic sense. Those are the completely open root, in its quiet phase, having discharged all the borrowed pressure with nothing coming in to replace it. The completely open root also carries the danger of not knowing when to hurry. This sounds paradoxical for a writer known for his speed, but speed and hurry are not the same thing. King's speed comes from the sacral motor and the manifesting generator's natural pace. The root issue is about being unable to calibrate urgency, not knowing which deadlines matter, which pressures deserve a response, which demands should be met with action, and which should be let go. In the years of heaviest addiction, this inability to sort real pressure from borrowed pressure contributed to the overwork. Everything felt urgent. The body had no internal mechanism for saying, this pressure is not mine, I can let it pass through. The sobriety and the accident and the aging process have, over the decades, taught King something about this. His pace in recent years is still productive by any standard, but it is more measured. There are gaps between books. There are projects he starts and sets aside. That is a person who has learned, through experience, if not through explicit knowledge of his design, that not every pressure requires a response. The wisdom potential of the completely open root is significant. Without any thematic framework for pressure, a person with this configuration can develop an unusually clear perception of what is genuinely urgent and what is manufactured stress. They can see through the artificial deadlines, the performative busyness, the cultural obsession with productivity for its own sake, because none of that is natural to them. King's opinions about the writing life, his insistence that it should be regular but not frantic, his repeated advice to young writers to have a life outside the work, his skepticism about the hustle culture that surrounds modern publishing reflect this wisdom. He knows from decades of being conditioned by pressure that was never his own, what happens when you let other people's urgency run your life. His open heart center. King also carries an open heart center, also called the ego center. This is the center of willpower, self-worth, and the capacity to make and keep promises. When it is open, willpower is not a consistent resource. The person cannot reliably call upon it. They absorb the willful energy of people around them and can temporarily feel like they have the drive to push through anything. But when the conditioning lifts, the willpower goes with it. This is one of the most counterintuitive aspects of King's chart, because from the outside, his career looks like a monument to willpower. 60-plus novels, daily writing sessions maintained for decades, coming back from near-fatal injury and addiction to keep producing. How can that not be willpower? It is not willpower. It is the sacral motor. Those are different things. The sacral provides life force energy, the raw capacity to do work, to engage with creative tasks, to sustain effort day after day. Willpower, in the human design sense, is the ego center's energy, the ability to commit, to promise, to exert control over circumstances through sheer force of will. King does not have that as a consistent resource. What he has is something that looks similar from the outside but operates completely differently on the inside. The sacral responds. The ego wills. King's productivity is response-driven, not will-driven. He does not muscle his way through books by promising himself he will finish. He sits down, the energy is there because the sacral said yes, and the work gets done. When the energy is not there, forcing it through willpower would be borrowing someone else's fuel, and it would not last. The not-self theme of the open heart center is feeling unworthy and undervalued. The question it asks is, do I think I have something to prove? King's entire relationship with the literary establishment can be read through this lens. For decades, he was the most commercially successful novelist in America and also one of the most critically dismissed. The literary world treated him as a hack, a genre writer, someone whose popularity was evidence of his lack of seriousness. King responded to this dismissal in ways that reveal the open heart center's conditioning. He talked about it constantly. He brought it up in interviews unprompted. He made it a theme of his National Book Award acceptance speech. He was for years visibly bothered by the sense that the establishment did not value him. A person with a defined heart center might have shrugged this off. Their self-worth would have been internally generated, consistent, not dependent on external validation. But King's self-worth, energetically speaking, was open to conditioning. When he was around people who valued him, his readers, his family, his peers in the horror and thriller world, the worth was there. When he was around people who dismissed him, literary critics, prize committees, academics, the worth wavered. The energy of those encounters amplified his sense of having something to prove, and he responded by working harder, producing more, trying to demonstrate through sheer volume and ambition that he deserved recognition. That is classic open heart center behavior, overachieving to compensate for an inconsistent sense of worth. The healthy expression of the open heart center is having nothing to prove. It is the realization that worth is not something that needs to be earned through willpower and promises and competitive striving. King has moved significantly toward this in his later years. He no longer seems to care much about what the literary world thinks of him. He writes what he wants. He praises other writers generously without positioning himself in competition with them. He has described in various interviews a kind of peace with his own place in the literary landscape that was not available to him in his 40s or 50s. That peace is the open heart center settling into wisdom, the accumulated understanding gathered from decades of absorbing other people's willful energy of who is genuinely capable of committing and delivering and who is performing confidence they do not actually possess. His completely open head center. The fourth open center in King's chart is the most unusual, a completely open head center. Like the root, this center has no activations at all. No gates, no themes, no framework for processing the mental pressure that flows into it from the outside world. The head center is about inspiration, about the pressure to think, to make sense of things, to find answers. When it is completely open, the person has no fixed relationship to any of these things. They do not know, in a reliable way, what is interesting to them. They do not have a consistent mental theme. They are open to thinking about anything and everything without a filter to distinguish what matters from what does not. This sounds like it should be a disability for a writer, but it functions as something closer to a superpower, provided the person does not try to use the head center to make decisions. King has never been a writer who works from ideas. He has said this explicitly many times. He does not start with a theme or a concept or an intellectual framework. He starts with a situation, an image, a what if that the sacral responds to, and then follows where the energy takes him. The head center is not driving the bus. It is along for the ride, and because it is completely open, it can go anywhere. There is no intellectual predisposition filtering out certain kinds of thought or privileging certain kinds of inquiry. King can write about small-town Maine and about the nature of evil and about marital breakdown and about interdimensional cosmic horror and about prison and about a dog and about the Kennedy assassination and about cell phones turning people into zombies. And none of these topics are more natural to him than any other. They all arrived from outside. They all passed through a mind with no fixed agenda. The ones that stuck were the ones the sacral responded to. The rest passed through and were forgotten. The completely open head center also explains something about King's public intellectual life, or rather, the relative absence of one. Unlike many writers of his stature, King has never been particularly interested in playing the public intellectual. He does not write essays about the nature of fiction or the state of the novel. He does not have a developed aesthetic philosophy that he articulates in interviews. When asked about such things, he tends to give plain, practical answers that deflect the intellectual framing. This is not anti-intellectualism. It is a completely open head center that does not have a fixed theme to hold on to, and so does not pretend to have one. What he can do, and does brilliantly, is recognize when other people are using their minds well and when they are not. That is the wisdom potential of the completely open head center. After a lifetime of absorbing everyone else's mental pressure without having a framework of his own, King has developed an extremely fine sense of who is thinking clearly and who is generating noise. His recommendations of other writers, his criticisms of political figures, his assessments of cultural trends, carry weight not because he has a superior intellectual framework, but because he has spent a lifetime watching minds operate from a position of total openness, and he knows the difference between genuine insight and performance. Taken together, these four open centers, solar plexus, root, heart, and head, form a specific pattern of vulnerability and potential wisdom that complements the defined channels. The defined channels give King his creative engine, his identity, his survival intelligence, his capacity for expression. The open centers give him his sensitivity to the emotional, pressurized, competitive, and mentally chaotic world around him. The fiction works because both sides are operating. The defined channels produce the work. The open centers provide the raw material, the absorbed emotions, the borrowed urgency, the amplified sense of what is at stake, the indiscriminate openness to whatever the world throws into the mind. King's genius, if you want to call it that, is not in the defined wiring alone or the open centers alone. It is in the combination, a self-contained creative engine running on fuel gathered from a lifetime of being wide open to everything the human environment has to offer and being unable to shut any of it out. All of the channels, the open centers, the type and profile, those are the mechanics of how King operates. But the Incarnation Cross is what all of that machinery is in service of. It is the overarching life theme, the purpose that the individual is designed to fulfill, whether that person knows it or not. King carries the left angle cross of the plane, gates 6 and 36, gates 15 and 10. This is the cross of someone who is here to understand the material world, not the spiritual world, not the abstract world of philosophy or theory, but the physical, tangible, mundane reality that human beings live in every day. The material plane. The world of bodies, objects, towns, weather, money, work, sickness, aging, broken screen doors, rusted cars, the smell of a diner at 6 in the morning, the sound of a lawnmower on a Saturday. This cross describes a person who grasps, at a level deeper than intellect, that we are inextricably part of this material reality, that we cannot escape it, and were never meant to, and that the grace available in human life is found inside the ordinary, not above it or beyond it. If you have read Stephen King with any attention at all, you already know this is exactly right. Every major theme of his work points here. King has spent 60 years insisting that horror is not about monsters. It is about people. Real people in real places doing real things when something goes wrong. The terror in his fiction comes not from the supernatural element, but from how precisely he renders the material world that the supernatural disrupts. Castle Rock is not a symbol, it is a town. It has a gas station and a general store, and people who gossip and a sheriff who is tired. Derry is not an abstraction. It has storm drains and a library and a standpipe and neighborhoods where the sidewalks buckle. The Overlook Hotel has a boiler that needs to be checked. The car in Christine needs body work. The dog in Cujo has specific veterinary symptoms. King does not use the material world as a backdrop. He inhabits it. He understands it the way someone understands their own hands. This is the cross of the plane doing what it does. The person with this cross has a deep, almost bodily comprehension of material reality. They know how things work, not in a mechanical genius sense, but in the sense of being fully present in the physical world and finding it endlessly interesting. King has always been interested in how things actually function, how a small town's social structure operates, how a family's finances shape its choices, how the layout of a house affects who sees what and when. This is not detail for detail's sake. It is the expression of a life theme that says, the material world is where life happens, and it deserves your full attention. The left angle orientation of this cross matters. Left angle crosses are transpersonal. They are not about the individual working out their own process, and they are not about carrying something forward from past lives in the way a right angle cross might suggest. The left angle is about meeting others and influencing them through the interaction. King's purpose is not just to understand the material plane for himself. It is to guide others toward that understanding, to help people accept material reality not as something to transcend or escape, but as the place where everything that matters actually happens. This is what On Writing does. This is what the best of his fiction does. This is what his public presence as an older, established figure in American letters does. He keeps pointing people back to the ground, back to the real, back to the physical facts of life. His writing advice is almost aggressively material. Sit in a chair, close the door, put words on paper, do it again tomorrow. His political commentary is rooted in material consequences: who gets hurt, who loses their house, who can't afford medicine. His interviews circle back again and again to the concrete. He does not float. He does not abstract. He stays on the plane. The cross includes gate 6, the gate of friction, which sits in his open solar plexus. This is the gate of emotional intimacy and conflict, the gate that governs how close we let people get and what happens when boundaries are crossed. In King's open solar plexus, this gate is activated by the cross, but not part of a defined channel, meaning it is a theme he carries without having consistent, reliable access to its energy. He absorbs other people's emotions and amplifies it. His fiction is full of this: marriages under pressure, friendships tested past their limits, the excruciating intimacy of people trapped together in small spaces with something terrible happening. He writes about emotional friction with the accuracy of someone who has spent a lifetime feeling it from every direction without generating it himself. Gate 36, the gate of crisis, also sits in his open solar plexus. This is the gate of darkening of the light, the experience of moving into unknown emotional territory, the feeling that something bad is coming and there is no way to prepare for it. This is almost literally the description of a Stephen King novel. The sense of approaching crisis, the darkening, the knowledge that ordinary life is about to be disrupted by something that cannot be controlled. Gate 36, in an open solar plexus, means King does not generate emotional energy himself. He receives it. He picks it up from the world around him, amplifies it, and pours it into stories that millions of people recognize as true to their own experience of dread. The cross places this gate as one of its 4 cornerstones, meaning the experience of emotional crisis is not incidental to King's purpose. It is central. His life theme requires him to engage with the darkening, to bring it into the material world of his fiction, and to show that even in crisis, the material plane holds. Gate 15, the gate of extremes, sits in his defined G center. This is the gate of love of humanity, a broad rhythmic capacity to embrace the full range of human behavior from the saintly to the monstrous without flinching. King's range as a writer of human character has always been remarkable. He writes killers and kindergarten teachers with the same level of engagement. He does not moralize. He does not sort his characters into good and evil and then treat them differently on the page. He treats them all as human. That evenness of attention, that willingness to look at the full spectrum of what people do and find it all worth rendering, is Gate 15 operating through the G-Center's sense of identity and direction. It says, all of this is part of the material world. All of it belongs here. None of it should be looked away from. Gate 10, the gate of the behavior of the self, is also in his defined G-Center, and it participates in several of the channels discussed earlier. But in the context of the cross, it takes on an additional dimension. Gate 10 is about love of self, about living as oneself, behaving in ways that are true to one's own nature. The cross of the plane puts this gate in a position where loving oneself and being oneself is directly connected to understanding and accepting material reality. The implication is that for King, being himself, writing what he writes, living how he lives, refusing to pretend to be a different kind of writer or a different kind of person, is not separate from his purpose. It is his purpose. By being fully himself in the material world, he demonstrates that the material world is enough, that you do not need to be somewhere else, someone else, doing something else, that the grace of ordinary life is available to anyone who stops trying to escape it. This is what the cross of the plane ultimately points to, and it is visible in King's entire body of work and public life. The material world is not fallen. It is not a prison. It is not a waiting room for something better. It is the place where human beings live, and it contains everything we need. King's fiction takes ordinary towns, ordinary families, ordinary fears, and treats them as worthy of the same attention and craft that literary fiction reserves for supposedly more elevated subjects. His nonfiction says the same thing in plainer terms. Do the work, pay attention to what is in front of you, stop pretending that the life you are living is less important than the life you wish you were living. At 78, deep in the role model phase of his 6-2 profile, this is the message King's entire existence communicates, not through lectures or philosophy, through the visible fact of a man who has spent his life on the material plane, fully engaged with it, fully present in it, and still here, still working, still paying attention, still treating the ordinary world as the most interesting thing there is. Bringing it all together. Stephen King is a manifesting generator with Sacral Authority and a 6-2 profile, a self-contained creative engine built almost entirely for individuation, whose enormous response-driven output is fueled by a sacral motor that never stops generating, guided by a fast, splenic survival instinct, and refined over a lifetime into a mastered craft that is unmistakably his own. Around that defined core sit 4 open centers where the world pours in. The emotions he absorbs and amplifies into terror and grief on the page, the borrowed pressure that drove both his superhuman output and his addiction, the willpower he never had to prove, and the endless questions that gave his wide-open mind anything at all to write about. And beneath it all runs the theme of his life's work, the left-angle cross of the plane, the man who stays on the ground, insisting that the material world, the small towns and broken screen doors and ordinary fears is not something to escape, but the very place where everything that matters actually happens, which is exactly what he has spent a lifetime and 78 years of being unmistakably himself showing us. Going deeper, Gates lines and planetary themes. Beyond the surface level reading above, you can go deeper into the nuances of the planets, gates, and lines as they appear in a chart. As you begin to weave in these qualities, an even more comprehensive picture unfolds, one that speaks to the very essence of a design. With King, we'll use his channel of structuring, the 4323, a design of individuality, as the anchor. But this time we'll also travel beyond the channel itself and pull in a related gate, Gate 62, to show how you can move around a chart and integrate gates and channels in combination rather than reading any single piece in isolation. In this example, we have a mix of both conscious and unconscious gate activations. King's mind has a design hardwired for sudden, deeply individual knowing that demands to be explained, paired with a gift for language, detail, and the disciplined withdrawal needed to get that knowing out in a form others can actually absorb. That combination, individual insight meeting painstaking verbal craft, is the engine behind decades of novels that mutated how millions of people think about fear, storytelling, and the ordinary world. Start with his Personality 43.6, the Gate of Insight at the 6th line. This is the line that carries the name of the whole hexagram, breakthrough. The 43 is the gate of the inner voice, a mind that knows things suddenly, not through step-by-step reasoning, but through spontaneous flashes. The 6th line version of this is very deep. It has the potential to wait long enough in its knowing process to become genuinely clear about what it knows before it says anything. And if it cannot get clear, it says nothing at all. It just sits there and evaluates whether other people's explanations are valid or not. The shadow side is real too. The 43 carries the fear that no one will ever understand what it means, that no one will know who it is or what it knows. That anxiety lives in the awareness center, and for someone like King, who spent years writing in a laundry room, unpublished, wondering if anyone would ever read his work, that fear would have been a constant companion. The 6th line also carries a detriment quality associated with Mars, where the ego can use its insight to justify its lesser attributes and drag those into whatever new order it establishes. There is a tendency to let the value of knowing override everything else in life. King has written openly about his years of alcoholism and drug addiction, periods where his brilliance as a knower coexisted with serious self-destruction. The 43.6 detriment warns exactly about this, carrying the old mess into the new breakthrough instead of letting the mutation clean house. Jupiter activates this 43.6. Jupiter brings expansion, growth, abundance. It inflates whatever it touches. So the insight capacity of the 43.6 gets amplified. Bigger knowing, bigger breakthroughs, but also bigger anxiety about whether anyone will understand. Jupiter on this gate helps explain the sheer volume of King's output. The man has published well over 60 novels. That is Jupiter expanding the breakthrough process again and again. Insight after insight, each one demanding to be brought into form. Now move to the design 23.5, the gate of assimilation at the 5th line. Gate 23 is the other half of the 4323 channel, the throat side, the voice that says, I know, or I don't know. This is the gate of individual expression through language, and it is specifically amoral. It does not care about conventional morality. It cares about getting the unique knowing out. The 5th line is the transpersonal line, the heretic's gift. A person with the 23.5 does not have to shout, I know. Other people project onto them that they know something. They are asked. And when they reveal their knowing and the explanation makes sense to others, they are rewarded for it and respected. King did not have to chase his audience after a certain point. People came to him expecting that he would know something about the dark, the strange, the terrifying. They projected onto him that he was the authority on those territories. And when his explanations, his novels, delivered, that projection was confirmed, and he was rewarded enormously. The detriment side of the 23.5 is a motive-driven assimilation where you know people are projecting on you and you use that strategically to get your knowing out. Whether King operated more from the exalted gift or the calculated detriment probably shifted across different periods of his career. But in either case, the 23 only really cares about one thing: that somebody is listening to its I know. Mars activates this 23.5. Mars brings energy, drive, sometimes aggression. On this fifth line expression of individual knowing, Mars gives the explanation a forceful, pushing quality. King's prose is famously relentless. It does not politely suggest, it grabs. That Mars energy on the 23.5 means the explanation comes out with real muscle behind it, sometimes with an edge that can be confrontational. His voice as a writer is not gentle, it is direct, blunt, occasionally brutal. Mars does that. Here is where we leave the 4323 channel itself and travel to another part of the chart, because a design is not a set of isolated channels, but a web you can move through. King's knowing does not stop at the individual voice of the 23. It also gets built out, named, and made concrete somewhere else entirely, through gate 62. His personality gate 62, line 4, is the gate of details in the line of asceticism. This is a completely different circuit. Gate 62 is logical, not individual. It is the gate of naming things. Its voice says, I think, or I don't think. It transforms mental opinions into language, and it does so through careful, patient detail. The fourth line here is about ascetic withdrawal. The detail can only be expressed properly after periods of isolation and reflection. You pull back from the world, work out the specifics in private, and wait for the right moment to share them. Anyone who has read about King's daily writing discipline knows this pattern. He writes every single day, he goes into his room, shuts the door, and works the detail, page after page. He has described his writing process as fundamentally solitary, a withdrawal into the work where the details get assembled one at a time. The 62.4 is not a motor, it is not emotional, it is patient, step-by-step construction, the opposite of the 43's sudden flash of insight. And yet King clearly has both operating. The flash comes first, and then the 62.4 sits down and names everything, describes everything, builds the logical architecture around it. Mars activates this first appearance of the 62.4, pushing energy into the withdrawal and detail process. This means the isolation is not passive or peaceful. There is a driven quality to it, an urgency. King did not just retreat to write, he drove himself into it. 2,000 words a day, every day, even on holidays. Mars on the 62.4 makes the ascetic withdrawal feel more like a campaign than a vacation. And the detriment quality of the fourth line under pressure is strategic. Organizing your detail in isolation and then waiting for the exact right moment to release it. King's relationship with his publishers, his timing of releases, his management of his own output, all of that has a strategic quality entirely consistent with Mars fueling this gate. His design 62.4 appears a second time, now activated by Mercury. Mercury is about communication, messaging, mental articulation. Mercury on the 62.4 doubles down on the linguistic function of this gate. Remember, the 62 is specifically the gate of naming things. Mercury here means the way King talks about what he knows, the way he articulates detail, is itself a defining feature of his design. His writing is famous for the accumulation of small, precise, ordinary details, the brand name of the beer on the counter, the specific sound a screen door makes, the way a character's shirt is tucked in. Those details are not decorative. They are the mechanism through which his logical mind translates its perceptions into language other people can process. Mercury on this gate means the communication of detail is not an afterthought. It is the point. So here is the picture, drawn from moving across the whole chart rather than a single channel. King's design gives him a mind that knows things suddenly and uniquely through the 43.6, expanded by Jupiter into enormous productive capacity. That knowing moves into expression through the 23.5, the amoral individual voice that people project authority onto, driven hard by Mars. And then the whole thing gets built out, named, and detailed through the 62.4, first with Mars pushing the solitary discipline of daily writing, and then with Mercury refining the actual language, the naming, the articulation of every small particular thing. The man who scared 100 million readers did it with sudden insight, a voice people could not stop listening to, and an almost monastic devotion to getting the details exactly right. There's no right or wrong way to keynote a chart. This is simply one way of doing it. Take some time with your own BodyGraph, follow this basic process, and sit with the results for yourself. Experiment with weaving in the different gates as they relate to your defined and open centers, and take time to ponder the meaning of the planetary accents. It's the best way to gain a deeper understanding and appreciation of the unique connections in your own design, and to begin unraveling the mysteries of what your chart actually has to say about you. I offer personalized human design services, written analyses, one-on-one foundation readings, and connection readings for the relationships that matter. Certified, in-depth, and made just for you. Check the video description for links.